introduce him formally, I want to make sure that we're recording. So with all that said, I want to spotlight myself to just say hi. I'm so happy to be with all of you. And I'm so happy to introduce my friend, my teacher, my compatriot in many things in life. I am happy to introduce you to my friend, Yisrael Campbell. Yisrael, would you say hello to everybody?
Certainly. Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael, Rabbi Sheffrin. Thank you. I want to thank everyone for Donald and Janice. Thank you for being here. I don't know how that is the world famous Reform Rabbi Susan Silverman's father and stepmother, and not to mention the pretty well-known comedian Sarah Silverman's father and stepmother. But my neighbor, Susan Silverman, who lives right behind me here in Jerusalem, I'm actually facing her house right now. I can report that all her lights are out and she's asleep. It's 2:00 in the morning here in Jerusalem. I'm happy to be with you. You want me to start with the story, or
I mean,
you want
I
to
feel
start
like
with a question?
let's go to Philadelphia. Like, let's start at the beginning. Who are you and how did you end up where you are today in your life?
So my name is Yisrael Campbell. It wasn't always. I am the firstborn son of a manic depressive Italian woman and a pathologically silent Irishman, which makes me wildly emotional in a very quiet way. I look calm, but I'm just going nuts on the inside. I grew up Catholic. Jews always want to know, how Catholic was I? Catholic enough to know I was going to hell. So I switched religions, right? That's a Yiddish cup, right? They told me there was no hell in Judaism. So I thought I'd convert to Judaism. And then I found out that there is a Hebrew word for hell, ulpan. Adult Hebrew language instruction is hell. I grew up in Philadelphia, as Michael said. My mother was in the convent after college. She spent a year in the convent. Thank God she left. Otherwise, only half of me would be here tonight. But my aunt was a nun, which makes Jesus my uncle. So I only mention that here in Jerusalem for parking. But I grew up Catholic. I quite honestly would not be Catholic today if I weren't Jewish. But I went on a journey that brought me to Judaism. And I guess we'll talk more about that.
Absolutely. Do you want to tell us about that? Do you want to tell us about your journey towards Judaism?
Sure. What happened for me was that at 16 years old, I found out I was an alcoholic and a drug addict. I found out I had a problem with alcohol and drugs, and I had to stop using them. I had started at 9 years old. I waited. I'm someone that could have used a drink on the way to kindergarten, but I waited till the 4th grade because I'm that kind of guy. At 16, when I stopped using alcohol and drugs, I had met a group of people that told me they could help me stop as long as I found a power greater than myself by which I could live. Obviously, they meant God. They said it didn't have to be God. It could be electricity if I wanted. And they said if I didn't think that electricity was a power greater than myself, I should go stick my finger in the light socket and find out that it was. But I was interested in building an ongoing, developing relationship with electricity. And I started seeking and I started searching. I tried going back to the Catholic Mass. That didn't speak to me. I tried meditation. I bought a candle. I lit the candle. I sat cross-legged in front of the candle. I closed my eyes, and my very first thought was, if I close my eyes, why did I light the candle? Right? And, with my luck, the meditation will work. I'll be transported out of the room, but the candle will fall over and the house will burn down, So I was seeking and I was searching as a form of trying to find this power greater than myself that they said I needed in order to live a life of sobriety. And that ultimately led me to Judaism. First, I was by then living in Los Angeles. It was about 12, 13 years later. I was in my late 20s, early 30s. I had started to pursue an acting career. I'd gone to drama school in New York. I'd moved out to LA. I was living in LA. I was working a horrible job. You know, when the best thing you can say about your job is it's not illegal, get another job, right? Unless you're the president or prime minister of any one of a couple of countries we know of. Especially when you have to add the addendum to it's not illegal of not the part I do. So if that's your job, get another job. But one day I was sitting in that office, leafing through the LA Weekly, one of those free newspapers that many cities in America have. And there was an ad in the back and it said, "So you want to be a Jew?" Now, that's not exactly what it said, but that was the thrust of the ad. It was actually a basic Judaism course, an introductory to Judaism course offered by the Reform Movement, then the UAHC. And I called the woman and I got the information for the course. It hadn't come completely out of the blue. I had, when I was about 18, and I'd met a young Jewish woman, which was like a burning bush to me. And she had given me a number of books to read, one of which was Exodus, which I read. Often when I tell this story, Jews, particularly rabbis, get that starry-eyed look and they say the Bible is a very powerful book. When I mention that I read Exodus, I have to note at that point that I meant the novel Exodus, Leon Uris's Exodus, not God's Exodus. And but I'd wanted to move to Israel when I read, you know, I didn't do that then. I went so far as to meet a rabbi who ran a program called Volunteers for Israel. But he said, "You're Catholic. What do you want to go to Israel for?" And I just thought, in my mind, a priest and a rabbi were on the same spiritual clergy plane. And if a priest told you he didn't want to do something, he certainly wasn't looking for a discussion. You know, he just telling you didn't want to do it. So I thought, I guess the rabbi knows I don't really want to do this. And I didn't pursue it. Anyway, many years later, as I said, 10 or so years later, I still had this. I had read Leon Uris. I read Exodus. I come to this like one-man Zionist band. And I'd read Elie Wiesel and Primo Levi and was fascinated by, these Holocaust survival stories. And, but I thought, if you're not, if you're not a religion, I didn't think you could change religions. I thought that was prohibited. And I even more than that thought, if you don't like Catholicism comes from Judaism. If you don't like the fruit, you're not going to like the tree. I was always of the opinion, they told us growing up that Catholicism had taken the best parts of Judaism and made them even better. They said we took the law and we made it merciful. I thought back to the priests and the nuns of my childhood, and I thought, if that was mercy, my God, the law must be untenable, And so I didn't really have a good concept of what Judaism was. And I took this course thinking I was going to, I thought I was infatuated with it sounds weird to say infatuated with the Holocaust, but infatuated with these stories of survival, both, the Exodus story of the birth of the state and Elie Wiesel and walking across Europe back to Italy, Primo Levi walking across Europe back to Italy, and Elie Wiesel becoming a Nobel Prize winner, and But I thought I'll find out about the religion, and I'll find out I don't like it any more than any other religion. Well, that turned out to be wrong, and so I initially did a conversion in the Reform community, and then. Couple of years later, I did a conversion in the conservative community. And then a couple of years after that, I did a conversion in the Orthodox community, all of which entailed circumcision. So 3 circumcisions is not a religious covenant. It's a fetish. So the humanists once approached me and said that I could convert to Judaism and there would be no further circumcision necessary. But it just didn't sound interesting to me.
And you today, after you converted into the world of the Orthodox, what does Jewish life look like for you today in Jerusalem? And how did you end up in Jerusalem?
So I was living in Los Angeles, as I said, and I had done the first two conversions in Los Angeles, and this was 20 years ago last week, actually. I came here first 20 years ago last week. So about 20 years and 6 months ago, I was, banging around Los Angeles and parts of several different, what I considered interesting Jewish communities, and I was learning, with people, and every time they would be learning out of the Gemara, out of the Talmud, and I would be learning out of an English translation, I would make a comment about the text, and they would say, "Oh, well, that's not really what it says." You know, they like to say all translation is interpretation, which I guess is true, but there would be correct correct interpretation and incorrect interpretation, it would seem, but that doesn't seem to be part of the discussion. Anyway, I wanted to learn Hebrew. I wanted to learn, study the texts in their original. And so I came, everyone I asked what I should do, where I should go, said I should go to a place called Pardes, which is here in Jerusalem, and a liberal institution where men and women learn together. It's kind of traditional learning in a liberal, progressive packaging. Men and women learn together, men and women teach, and that's where I ended up that summer 20 years ago. And then once I was here, I decided to stay for the year. And then in the year, I met the woman who's now my wife, who was my Gemara teacher, and I'm really grateful I didn't go to a more traditional yeshiva. Otherwise, I'd be married to like an 80-year-old chain-smoking rabbi. And we'd be going to the parade. That's part of a bigger joke that we don't really have time to tell today, but you can imagine. Anyway, I learned at Pardes for 2 years. In that time, Avital and I got married, and we've since had 4 children, and we live here in Jerusalem. And I mean, life has changed due to the coronavirus, as it has for many of us. But say 6 months ago, my day started about 5 o'clock in the morning. I would get up and go, best case scenario, I'd go to the mikveh and then to 6 o'clock minyan. Otherwise, I'd go to minyan and then the mikveh. The men at the minyan don't wait, no matter what. 6 o'clock they start. 5:58 they start. I don't know why. And then I would get the kids off to school, and in the last year or so, I became a guide at Yad Vashem because as a comedian, I like a challenge. But I became an English language guide at the Holocaust Museum here in Jerusalem. So many days I would go there in normal circumstances. When my mother passed away about 3 years ago, I decided I was going to say Kaddish for her, even though she was the least religious person. She was actually the most religious person I knew. She was just furious at religion for having it had been a big disappointment to her. But anyway, I decided, though halakhically, though by Jewish law, I was not bound to say Kaddish for her. You guys will love this, because by Jewish law, she isn't really my mother anymore. Upon conversion, I became Yisrael. I chose the name Yisrael. My previous name was Christopher. It's not such a Jewish name. It is a really Jewish name, but not such a popular Jewish name. Probably the best known Jew in the world, actually. But anyway, it's not a popular Jewish name. So I took Yisrael. I chose it not knowing really. My rabbi said I had to choose a name. I reread Exodus. I came to him with 2 names. He said, you can't have the first one. It's a girl's name. I suppose I'm glad I'm not named Daphna today. But the second one was Yisrael. And I took that name really for the whole thing, for the whole story. Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, the love of Israel, Ahavat Yisrael, and the God of Israel. And I didn't even know when I took it. Of course, it's the name that Jacob, our forefather Jacob, takes after he wrestles with the angel, right? The angel renames him Yisrael, he who wrestles with God. And Christopher really means the Christ bearer. So truly, it's the best name for me, Yisrael, because I don't bear well, but I'm an excellent wrestler. And so I did the 2 conversions in Los Angeles, and then I did the 3rd here after I arrived. And what does a typical day look like? So I started to tell you, I started saying Kaddish for my mother, right? So that's how I got to that part. Remember, please, if I seem hard to follow, please remember it's 2:24 in the morning for me.
We forgive you.
We could have done this at a reasonable time for me, and all of you could have gotten up in the middle of the night, but we decided it would be better if only one of us had to deal with getting up in the middle of the night. Anyway, how's that for Jewish guilt? So when I converted, I became Yisrael ben Avraham v'Sara, right? Yisrael, son of Abraham and Sarah. The idea is that a convert takes Abraham and Sarah as their parents, and strictly speaking, by Jewish law, my parents become my not parents. But when my mother died, I decided I was going to say Kaddish for her. I was going to say it in shul. I was going to say it 3 times a day. Quite honestly, in Jerusalem, it's the easiest city in the world to say Kaddish for someone. There's minyanim morning, noon, and night, literally. Many times. You know, if you miss the 6, you can catch the 7 and the 8 and the 9 and the 9:15 and the 10:15, and it's endless. But I decided I was going to do that, and I did do that, and I got into a habit of going to synagogue every day, both for morning services, Shachrit, as well as Mincha and Mariv, afternoon and evening services.
And would you tell us a little bit about some of the institutions that you have prayed at over the years? I adore your wife and your kids, and have been to various shuls where they have prayed as well. And I know that, the 2 of you are involved in some very progressive Jewish organizations in Jerusalem. Would you share 1 or 2 of those with us?
Sure. We were founding members of Shira Hadashah, which has now developed the name of Partnership Minyan. The idea is that we count 10 men and 10 women. It's a really good Jewish idea. It's hard enough to get 10 men to come to shul on time. Now we've included 10 women. So it's doubly hard, and we like that. No, that's not why we did it, but it's the idea of inclusivity, the idea of, and as far as possible, the bima is egalitarian. Seating is separate, just to describe the layout and landscape and architecture of the shul. Seating is separate, but the bima, it's not completely egalitarian, but it's pushing the limits of being. Women can do most of the prayers, and they get aliyot to the Torah, and they read the Torah, and lead most of the prayers, not all the prayers. And that's where we are most of the time. That's where our children have so far been bar and bat mitzvahed. My wife is a longtime faculty member of the Shalom Hartman Institute, and they don't do so much prayer there, but there's a lot of progressive thought going on there. We're part of the Shivyoni, the egalitarian minyan of Baka, which is the Hebrew version kind of Shira Hadashah, although it's become more progressive. They're built on a synagogue, on a prayer group that I like to say they pray so quickly that you come out younger than you went in, because they actually turn back time. So that's fun, that's kind of the Hebrew Israeli thing at full speed. They don't breathe. Like they pray literally so quickly, you're actually younger when you're done than you were when it's a little bit of a time warp, because of course, since you're younger, you have to start the prayers over again because they keep turning back time. So you're stuck kind of in a space-time continuum thing. But anyway, we're a part of a lot of different, as that's kind of where we live in progressive, as mostly Orthodox, well, communities that would call themselves Orthodox and communities that may not be called Orthodox by other Orthodox. But certainly the idea, traditionally observant of Shabbat, and holidays, and that's the praying 3 times a day for my mother has put me in various synagogues. There's a shtibel, which is like a prayer room where there's just that's where one of those places where you can catch the prayer service of the time just over and over and over again. There's one in Rachavia, which is kind of where the I don't know. I don't want to call it American Jerusalem, but a lot of
it was up the street from my apartment.
Right, exactly. A lot of angle, but there's also a shtibel in Mea Sharim, which is so conservative that they're like Neturei Karta types, like they're opposed to the state of Israel. So outside the shtibel in Mea Sharim, you have a flag of Palestine, and it says "Free Palestine." I don't think particularly because they care about the Palestinians, but they just don't like the secular state of Israel and its government. A feeling I share with them, but not to the point where I want to abolish it completely. I just want to replace it. And I've had several opportunities this year to replace it, none of which were successful.
So, Yisrael, if I might, your wife, the wonderful Rabbi Avital Hochstein, who is she is phenomenal. She's a Talmudist and a published author and a leader, as you mentioned, at the Hartman Institute. And I, had the chance to learn with her a bit, and I feel like in many ways, some of the classes I took with her at Hartman were really influential for me. They were definitely forming in my understanding of how to study Gemara, how to study Talmud, and how to extract my relationship with Judaism from it. And I'm wondering if you might share with us some of your influences in your career. Now, I say that knowing that your career has been incredibly varied. So maybe you'll do a couple highlights of your career and some influences, if you would.
Sure. Just to add to my wife's accomplishments, as of this afternoon, she received her official recognition of her doctorate has been accepted.
Woo,
She is
mazel
now
tov.
a Dr. Rabbi Avital Hochstein. And I'm like a 15-time Ulpan reject. Her father has a PhD, her sister's getting a PhD, her mother works in public policy with the Mandel Institute and is a past president of the Mandel Institute. People always ask, were her parents nice when they met you? I said, considering that I'm sure they never held their daughter and said to themselves, we hope she marries an illiterate convert, they were always very nice. So first and foremost, in a very real way, she has been an influence because she's no nonsense about her religious life. She does not make a big deal out of it. I mean, she's accomplished, but just because if you keep doing this stuff and you're really good at it, you're gonna accrue accomplishments. But she's not a flashy, I like the stuff, right? I've got the kippah, I've got the pom-pom on the kippah, I've got the hat over the kippah, I've got the strings on, I've got the vest on, I've got the, the blue shirt, even though I should be wearing a white one. Like, I like the accessories. Like, I started playing tennis a couple months ago. I now own 2 rackets. You know what I mean? Like, I'm getting one of those big bags like Roger Federer has because I need to carry 8 rackets out to the court. I love the stuff. Like, the tallis and a girdle to wrap around my waist. And, my wife doesn't like the stuff. She just likes to actually do the stuff, the real stuff. And so that's been a big influence. And finding place has been, inspired by her. And I mean, Jewishly, truly, I've since when I was a little kid growing up, we had a book on the shelves called Souls on Fire, which was Hasidic stories told by Elie Wiesel, who like Martin Buber tells stories. Elie Wiesel's just a lot better at it. And better at it, by that I mean they're more compelling versions of the same stories. And Wiesel writes, he has books and books and books about the Hasidic masters, and the Baal Shem Tov was an early influence. How I could be influenced by a Hasidic rabbi who lived in the late 1700s in the Ukraine, I don't exactly know, except to say that that since I've been several times to his grave in Mezhebush, and through the Ukraine to the graves of Rabbi Nachman and Rabbi Natan and Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev, and all of that has always been incredible. The Hasidic stories have been incredibly compelling to me. I think in part because they harken back. There's so much legal structure. There's so much conversation recorded over 5,000 years of discussion in Judaism that I find it's easy to kind of lose the soul connection. And I think it's important for me to remember that I started this search as a way of making a personal connection so that I could figure out a way not to pick up a drink or a drug for one day. And that's where it started for me. And the Hasidic stories and the Hasidic connections are a good way of me keeping that. Now, it's a little, Michael asks for influences, and I tell you about visiting the graves of the Hasidic rabbis in Ukraine is a little pompous, I would say, but it's truly been some kind of food. But I'll say this, one of my biggest and probably, in a certain way more, tangible influence, was Rabbi Jim Kaufman, who was my first rabbi in the Reform Synagogue, and I love Jim. I just had coffee with Jim in January when I was back in Los Angeles. He wouldn't want me to call him my Rebbe because that's not how he's more like my wife than I am, and he would think that was silly to call him a Reform rabbi, a Rebbe. But what I love about Jim, and I've always loved about Jim, was when I first went to his synagogue, fired up and inspired by this class that I had taken or this information that I gathered, he fed that. He fed it and kept feeding it. And when it was time for me to kind of move on to the next phase and take it to the next place, the way I describe it is, and hear me out, he welcomed me into his synagogue and he welcomed me out of his synagogue. And what I mean by that is he was, in my experience, a lot of people in the Jewish world are very happy if you're doing just like them. But do a little more, do a little less, and suddenly they get uncomfortable. And with Jim, it was very clear that he understood that I was on my journey. And so when my journey was taking place in his midst, he was very happy with that. But when it was time for me to move on and go somewhere else, he was just as happy for me to have that experience. And that's what I mean when I say he welcomed me out of his. He's just as happy to hear about what's going on for me today. And he doesn't begrudgingly say, oh, if only you had stayed part of Temple Beth Hillel in North Hollywood, California, we would have all been better. He's happy that I'm where I am doing what I'm doing. And that's a beautiful thing to represent in the world, and however you can, wherever you can.
I agree. Thanks for that. I'm going to throw something out of left field at you. If you Google Yisrael Campbell, lots of wonderful images come up. I wanted to share one with the group and hope that maybe you could, tell us what is going on in this photo. Can you see it, Yisrael?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great.
That's not the image I thought you were going to bring up. That is a piece of baby clothing. My wife was, I like to say we had twins, but I didn't really do so much at the birth. My wife was pregnant with twins. They just turned 16 2 weeks ago. That is a onesie that my daughter came home from the hospital. She was born at 1.5 kilos, which I like to say is I don't know how much because I didn't pay attention when they said the metric system was going to catch on. It's about 3 pounds, a little less than 3 pounds, right around 3 pounds. And you don't come home until you're 2 kilos. And my wife was 10 weeks in the hospital on bed rest. And then my daughter stayed another 17 days in the NICU, in the neonatal intensive care, while she gained the next. She was born at 1.5 kilos. She had to be 2 kilos to come home. So she had to gain 500 grams, which she did in 17 days, thanks in large part to the Russian nurses of Har Hatzofim Hospital, Hadassah Har Hatzofim. Anyone that's a Hadassah supporter, I thank you, because that's where they were born and that's where where she grew initially. And she came home in that piece of clothing. The tag on that piece of clothing says Baby Gap. And then it says newborn preemie, and then it says 0 to 5 pounds. And when I first received that piece of clothing from my mother-in-law to bring her home in, I noticed on the tag, it seemed funny to me that it said 0 to 5 pounds. And I built a whole joke, a whole thing around that 0 pound baby, that first of all, a 0 pound baby does not need clothes, right? And they must know that at the Gap, that's all they ever do is clothe people, right? And I go into a whole thing where I say that someone in the tag department stood up and said the tag will say newborn preemie 1 to 5 pounds, and someone else said, no, write 0, we can clothe the 0 pound baby, we're the Gap. And then I don't know if you noticed, but there's a pocket, and I say, does the 0 pound baby need a pocket? 0 pound baby has neither arms nor legs. It doesn't need a pocket. And I go on and on about how little one knows. When we were sent home with that baby at 17 days old, all they told us was that she has to eat, that she has to poop 4 to 5 times a day. And I hold up the clothing and it's tiny. It's like, I say, 4 to 5 times a day. Okay, how long, could it take? The bottle's longer than she is, And I do this whole thing about the first day she was born, she pooped 4 times, which is within the average. I'm not going to be one of those fathers that insists on the 5th poop. And it was a Thursday and Friday, nothing, no poop. And we can't call anyone because it's Shabbat. And so Saturday, still no poop. Now she has 8 to 10 poops floating around in her body. And we still can't call anyone. I don't know if you know this, but in Jerusalem in late July, when you have a baby that's not pooping, Shabbat goes out at like 4 o'clock in the morning. Finally, we call the doctor, and the doctor said, and this is, all of this is true. I'm just looking at it from that angle of a comedian. The doctor said a baby poops 4 to 5 times a day or once a week. As if that were supposed to be comforting. And I said to the doctor, you're telling me that the normal range is 28 to 35 times a week or once? Like, how can that be the normal range? And then, I talk about holding my baby. The first day I held her before all of this, and all I wanted her to do was be happy and marry a Jew and get an education. I go on, and then 17 days later, I'm looking at the same baby thinking, just poop.
Thanks for indulging me.
Thank you.
So in a couple minutes, I want to invite anybody that's joining us tonight. If you have questions, please start entering them into the chat. I thought that we would pose some questions to you from the group if they'd like to ask you anything. But
sure,
in the meantime,
absolutely.
Would you tell us about life today in Israel regarding like the pandemic, regarding, I know there's a lot of protests, like what's happening on the ground in Jerusalem and in Israel that you'd like to share with us?
So we Look, in terms of overall numbers, we've been very lucky. I don't have the exact figures in front of me because I don't feel like, my knowing the exact corona figures are going to be helpful to anyone. But in a general sense, we've had about 400 deaths, and I believe about 20,000 cases total. The first run, say from Purim, we went into a lockdown right after Purim. We stayed in lockdown through Passover. We came out of lockdown 6-8 weeks ago, and now we've started. Our cases are high again. But again, when I say high, I mean between 1,000 and 2,000. We were pushing 2,000 cases at the end of last week. Shabbat numbers are always much lower because they do much less testing. And then Sunday, we were still below around 1,000 instead of 2,000. So we seem to be going in the right direction again. And there is a government now after 3 elections in 1 year without a government forming. It's supposed to be an emergency government. It's supposed to be Corona-centered. And now, as they're pushing for more restrictions and lockdowns, people are fighting them because, I think in part, because we had this very successful first lockdown, and we weren't supposed to go anywhere. There was really there was all sorts of restrictions, but you could exercise within a couple hundred meters of your house, and you could see friends within 500 meters. And then for Passover, we had a complete lockdown. You weren't supposed to leave your house at all. You weren't supposed to have anyone over, no guests, no. And then we heard that both Bibi and Rivlin, the president and the prime minister, both had their children over for Passover. So, and this government that was supposed to be Corona-centered and emergency suddenly got preoccupied with annexation in early July, kind of lost track of Corona. And I think people feel like they were to some degree getting worked for Netanyahu's own purposes. And now there are tremendous protests almost every night outside the prime minister's residence. The Corona committee itself, which is run by a Likudnik, which is Netanyahu's party, is not taking the government's recommendations. It's going with its own recommendations based on the science. And there's just a lot more pushback in general. So in general, people are in. I was playing tennis this morning, playing doubles at 7:30 this morning. And at 9:15, we play from 7:30 to 9:30. 9:15, my partner, his phone rang and he answered it, and he was told he had to go into isolation. He literally picked up his bag and left the court, and we played singles. About 5 o'clock, I got a call from him saying, dude, I want to play tomorrow. And I said, what about isolation? He said, no, they called later and said only my wife has to go into isolation. So it's very unclear what's going on. It's very unclear how it's going on. In general, it seems to have started getting better again after getting worse. But in bigger pictures, our numbers compare. I mean, we're a population the size of New York. We're far better off than New York was. Even my sister lives in Delaware County, which is suburban Philadelphia, which is certainly not as many people as the state of Israel, and they've had 3 times as many deaths. So in general, I think we're doing pretty well with Corona, but it's very present. Everything is about it. Everything is about masks. Masks have not become politicized here. People outside wear masks. Many of them wear them on their chin, but they wear them nonetheless. I think that's more being an Israeli than a political statement.
So there's been a few questions about your children. So I want to ask, one of the questions is I think that Allison Gold is asking, what paths have your children taken? I'm assuming that means Jewishly. Another question is, will your children serve in the IDF? My question is, do your children think that you're funny, and how are their baseball careers going?
They're so they haven't yet really gotten to choose their paths per se. The twins are now 16, as I said. My daughter is kind of a B'nai Akivnik, the youth movement of B'nai Akiva. She's more right-leaning. I wouldn't call her right-wing, but in our house, she's right-wing. But you can be a devout leftist and be right-wing in our house. My son belongs to a thing called Kids for Peace, which is an Palestinian, Jewish, Christian, Arab, Jewish, Muslim organization that brings together, here in Jerusalem, it brings together Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs, both Christian and Muslim, who of course also and probably primarily identify as Palestinian, not Israeli Arab. The parents meet too. It's a very complex deal. And my middle son refuses to go to Kids for Peace. And my little one is 10. He's not there yet. They are going to serve in the IDF. Their mother did. There's an old Woody Allen joke: in the event of war, I know it's not politically correct to tell Woody Allen jokes. I probably should have just said an old Jewish comic that I've heard, because it's a funny joke. In the event of war, he's a hostage. That's my ranking too. My classification is in the event of war, I'm a hostage. But their mother served in the IDF. Their grandfather served. Their aunt served. I look differently religious than we actually are, and I can't exactly explain why I dress this way, but my children are going to serve in the army.
I want to share another photo. It's just a special moment personally in my life. This is, why isn't it working? Here we go. This photo, I don't know if you've actually ever seen it. This is the day I was ordained as a rabbi, just over 4 years ago. And you, while living in Jerusalem, are here and holding my smicha, the certificate of my diploma, with my mom is actually there too. And you were there in Los Angeles. You came to.
I almost had a hard time getting into the center.
That's the story I was gonna tell, which is like it cracks me up. I'm looking for. I want to make myself the screen. You came to this reform, Hebrew Union College at Temple Emanu-El in Beverly Hills, both Rabbi Glickman and I's alma mater, from early days of our Jewish education under the age of 13. And you came, and there's all of these Los Angeles Reform Jews and all of the big mucky mucks in the Reform movement from the CCAR and the URJ, and you come walking up with your, the black coat and the hat, and I had no less than 10 people tell me, oh my goodness, there's a Haredi guy here to protest that they're making new Reform rabbis. And it caught me so off guard, and I'm looking up going, this is my friend Yisrael. He's here from Jerusalem. He's here to celebrate with us. And it was such an amazing moment in thinking about just our own perceptions of the world. It was a great moment. I thank you for sharing that special day with me. It was such a rewarding thing. I'm going to try sharing one other photo, which if you want to tell the story about this. I've been to this location with you in Jerusalem, but I'll share this one as well for everyone to see.
So this is from the Pride Parade in Jerusalem. I started going to the Pride Parade 5 years ago after Shira Banki was murdered there. She was a 16-year-old girl who was there at the Pride Parade supporting her friends who, this is at the memorial. That's her picture behind me. That's the spot. She was actually murdered in the middle of the street, but they set up a memorial on the corner during the Pride Parade. It's interesting in many ways. I'll just say one thing, that she was attacked by a Haredi man, by an ultra-Orthodox Jew who had attacked Pride Parade people who were attending the Pride Parade 10 years earlier with a knife, and had stabbed some people, though he hadn't murdered anyone. He had spent 10 years in prison, and for some reason, they let him out of prison like 6 weeks before the Pride Parade, and he came back to the parade again, and this time he murdered that little girl, Shira Banki, 16-year-old girl, not little girl, but little when you're 57 or 80. She wasn't gay. She was there to support a friend. Not that that should matter really, but what I was starting to tell you is that that sign is a memorial that is set up during the Pride Parade, but it's not there. There's no recognition of the site normally, which is contrary to most terror sites here in Jerusalem. There's almost always signs with the names of the people that were murdered at that place, whether it was a bus bombing or a cafe bombing or any kind of bombing. I'm not sure. I've asked several city council members why there's no recognition of her attack. Perhaps it's because it's Jew on Jew. Perhaps because it's the pride issue. Perhaps it's because her parents. I've heard all of these, and I've heard that her parents don't want a sign put up. So I'm not sure what it is. Anyway, during the Pride Parade, they recognized that, and the year after she was murdered, I started attending, and it of itself, if you can imagine how much attention I got walking into Temple Emanu-El in Beverly Hills to attend the ordination ceremony of the Hebrew Union College, you can imagine how much attention I get walking into the Pride Parade the year after this girl was murdered. I am, as I should be, going to the Pride Parade dressed like that. I'm stopped by the police every year 10 times, if once. The first initial time it takes me, because it's Jerusalem and because this happened, it's a completely fenced in, walled off experience. So everybody that goes in has to go through security. I get a lot of attention going in, and I get a lot of attention from the police throughout it's not really a march, it's more of a walk. It's not a parade, and it's certainly not like the West Hollywood or the Miami or the New York City Pride Parade. It's very tame. It's boring. It's so tame, but it's there, and many people think it shouldn't be there. And I decided to go. Again, I'm not Haredi. I'm not from the community of that. The man but to some degree, I have chosen to dress like him. My kids think I'm crazy, and they and their friends often walk with me, and then I can hear them saying, "Want to meet a fake Haredi? Want to meet a fake Haredi?" It doesn't, to a teenage mind, which is so clear in its clarity and its moral thinking. What I'm doing is tricking people. I don't think I'm tricking people. I don't pretend to be anything that I'm not, except what I do pretend to not be. And that's not limited to dressing like this. This morning, as I said, I was pretending to be a tennis player. And, I think that I can't explain it. I have a joke about it, but it's not even worth wasting the time telling, which has to do with, now I'm going to tell it, right? When I converted Reform, it upset the Catholics. When I converted Conservative, it upset the Reform. When I converted Orthodox, it upset the Conservative. The only way I have to upset the Orthodox is to dress Haredi, ultra-Orthodox. But I upset the ultra-Orthodox also because I shake women's hands. So that's my theory. Nonetheless, I think it's important to support and to memorialize this young woman that lost her life, that was murdered. It's funny, I have a dear friend. Sorry, Michael, just really quickly. When I was at Pardes, just after I finished my second year, there was the bombing at the Hebrew University at the Frank Sinatra Cafe, and my two of my friends were, I often say killed, and a lot of people I know say killed, but their parents always say murdered. And I think, I almost said that Shira Banki was killed, and then I don't know if you caught it, I changed it and I said that she was murdered. And I think I think that terror victims are murder victims, not you drive your car in Jerusalem and you get killed in a car accident, you got killed. But this is murder and should be called as such.
I was going to say that I, too, was at that parade. I was interning for the Hebrew Union College that summer in Jerusalem for the first year of rabbinic and cantorial students. And we were there as a class when Shira was killed, maybe 50 yards in front of us. When all of the chaos around her murder broke out, and walking across the bloodstained street and gathering with people that day, I remember very clearly that week being in your home and processing some of that pain and just the challenge that was going through the entire community in Jerusalem that year. And I know that many of us, whether it's the pandemic or fears about the economy or the headlines in the news, or our attack on our temple this week and one of the other temples here in town in Sarasota. I was just thinking, I wanted to ask you what might be a tough question, but if laughter is the best medicine in the world, what's the thing that gets you through? What's the funny thing, the inspirational thing that carries you through a tough moment in life? Or if there's a favorite comedy moment.
I think it's that, it sounds silly, but it's finding the laughter and finding the funny. And, and sometimes I can and sometimes I can't, I think it's, the Hebrew University bombing was in the Frank Sinatra Cafe, and years later, sometime later, I used to do a joke about, where I'd mention that the bombing was at the cafe, and then I'd say, and all I can say is, thank God Frank was dead, because could you imagine Hamas getting a call from the Gambino family? Ahmed, I don't know who they are, but they're very pissed off, right? That's not funny to Jazzy Doc and his wife, but some people are chuckling. Like, funny is funny to who it's funny to, you know what I mean? And not everything is funny to everyone. There was an article once in the Jerusalem Post it said Master Hamas bomb maker killed by the IDF. So I read the story, and it said that he had, supposedly it was this, they kept using the term Master Hamas bomb maker. And then it turned out that he had one arm and no legs as a result of work accidents, which made me think that maybe he wasn't such a master bomb maker. Maybe he was more of a mildly proficient bomb maker at best, and then I thought, what if you show up for master bomb making class and the teacher has one arm and no legs? You know what I mean? Like, I would want to defer till next semester. I would want the two-armed, two-legged master bomb making teacher, So, and like that baby clothes, right? My daughter's in the neonatal intensive care unit for 17 days. She can't come home. Her brother's home already. And it's not funny. It's not funny when you say to the nurse, I don't think she wants to eat anymore. I fed her first meal. It was 5 cc's of formula in the nipple of a bottle. They didn't even attach a bottle to it. And the nurse was this Russian nurse who's, English was like her fourth language. And she says to me, "She will eat," and suddenly I'm seeing, Joseph Stalin feeding the masses, or starving the masses, as the case may be. And, and hence she gained 500 grams in 17 days when in 35 weeks in my wife's, uterus, she hadn't gained, but 3 times that. So I certainly don't know how to teach comedy, and I don't know how I learned comedy, but I just, those are the things. When I saw that tag and it said 0 to 5 pounds, and I thought to myself, a 0-pound baby does not need clothes. Like, there's just no need, A 1-pound baby needs clothes, but a 0-pound baby does not, and that's just, sometimes it's a gift and sometimes it's wildly inappropriate, but that's what I have to offer life.
Thank you, my friend. It's really a treat to spend time with you. It's now 3:04 in the morning your time. So I want to just take this moment to say thank you. Thank you for spending time with us. Thank you for drinking some coffee. Thank you for some laughs and some insight. I'm so grateful for your friendship. I love you. You've been an inspiration to me, and I'm seeing lots of people who are clapping their hands and shaking their hands. So if you want to just take a moment to look around the Zoom room and just see some appreciation from our community for spending time with us tonight, Yisrael, I am truly, truly grateful. I wish I could say that the gift shop was open at Temple Emanu-El right now, but it's not. I wish I could say lots of things, but we will have services this Friday, Torah study on Saturday, Havdalah Saturday night. We'll be commemorating Tisha B'Av next Wednesday evening. There's lots of programming to make sure to check your Tuesday emails. Again, I welcome all of you who are not members of Temple Emanu-El, but are definitely an extension of our family all over the state, all over the world. And friends, we're just happy to be together. Yisrael, do you have a closing thought before we say goodnight?
First of all, I want to say thank you to everyone that came out, and to your senior, your colleague, Rabbi Brenner Glick. I can't see your whole name. Sorry, Brenner Glickman, right? Glickman?
Yes.
Anyway, okay, sorry. So, but thank you for being here, and thank you both. Thank you all for coming into your living rooms and leaving your kitchens for an hour. I know it's a lot to ask for Jews not to eat for an hour. And, I just want to say that I don't know if it's the right way to look at it, but it's certainly a sideways way to look at it. But to say that, your attack, the attack that happened to your synagogue this week, the one thing I want to say is, and it's bizarre, and I don't know how it will sound once I say it, but it puts you in, it's like in LA, everyone's written a screenplay, and then about 5% of them have ever been produced. And it's like, sadly, it puts you with the greater majority, or it puts you in esteemed Jewish company to have been the victims of an anti-Semitic attack. But I don't want to focus on the victimness, and I don't want to focus on the damage, and I don't want to put it in the relativity of where this attack is as it's. I don't want to compare attacks and say, well, that attack was worse. I just want to say that this is something that has happened to Jews for time immemorial, and that I believe that the beauty of Judaism is that what Jews have continued to do when things like this happen is protect the stranger and look out for the orphans and the widows and love God and pray to God and sing to God. It was Heschel that said, when a Jew is sad, he cries. And when he's even sadder than that, he's silent. But when he's even sadder than that, he sings. And that's what Jews do, and that's what I believe the Jewish response to terror and to hatred is to sing, is to laugh, to love God. We're a strong and powerful people, and I don't know the Sarasota community, but I know one of your two rabbis, and I would say that based on everything I know about Reform Judaism, you are a strong, a proud, and a powerful people. And some crazy nut, graffitiing on your building, don't be cowed, hold your heads high, and do the work of what being a Jew is all about, and know that strength is on your side, history is on your side, love is on your side, God is on your side, and keep on doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Yisrael. On behalf of everybody, thanks so much for being with us tonight. We look forward to hopefully one day soon having you come perform for us and spend a Shabbat here. That would
Wonderful.
be the best.
Can't wait.
And so many people on this call. Thank you. So I'm just gonna unmute.
And wear masks when you go outside.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Over your mouth, not unlike the Lone Ranger.
If you wanted to unmute yourself, Yisrael, if you need to leave, feel free. I just want to give everybody the chance to say hellos and whatnot. And thank you all again, and thanks for being here. And thank you, Yisrael. We love you. Thank you, friend.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi
Thank you,
Sheflin.
God.
Thank you.
Thank you for staying up to
Thank
talk to
you.
us and entertain us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Toda rabah.
Thank you.
Bavakasha. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you for your
Love.
beautiful finale.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can say hello to my family in Israel, and my
Yeah.
son's name is Israel. So
Ah.